The woman who called herself Clara Wendell signed the ledger with a hand that did not shake. It was a small victory, but the first one in months. The wagon master, a man named Hines with a beard stained yellow from tobacco, peered at her over the rim of his spectacles. "Cook, you said—" His voice was gravel. "Yes, sir. I can cook for 10 or 100. Biscuits, beans, bacon. I can make sow belly taste like Sunday ham." Hines grunted. He looked at her thin frame, the decent quality of her black morning dress. She did not look like a camp cook. She looked like a parson's wife, which was a bitter thing to taste in her own mind. "A lone woman, Mrs. Wendell. This ain't no pleasure trip. We're heading for Helena, Montana territory. It is rough country, Indians, weather, men." "I am a widow," Clara said, the words practiced and smooth. "My husband died at Gettysburg. I have no people left in the East. I mean to start again. I will not be a burden. Sir, I will earn my keep." The lie about Gettysburg came easy. It was cleaner than the truth. The truth was a small, mean room in Kansas, the smell of whiskey, and the dreadful, hollow sound of a man's head hitting a bedpost. The truth was shame. Hines stared at her for another long moment, then dipped his pen in the inkwell and shoved the ledger back toward him. "We roll at dawn. You'll answer to me and only me. The Teamsters are rough men. You keep to your wagon. Your pay is $40 upon safe arrival." "Thank you, sir," she whispered, relief making her dizzy. She turned away from the desk, clutching her small carpet bag. Fort Laramie was a frantic, churning sea of noise and dust. Soldiers, teamsters, merchants, and hollow-eyed settlers all swarmed the parade ground. Men shouted, oxen bellowed, and the clang of a blacksmith's hammer rang sharp and constant. She found her assigned wagon, a heavy, canvas-topped supply carrier that would also be her kitchen, the chuck wagon. It smelled of salt pork, old flour, and axle grease. This, she thought, was the smell of her new life. She would be invisible. She would be no one, just a cook. The wagon train set out at dawn, a long, groaning snake of 20 wagons, 150 souls, and 300 head of cattle. They left the relative safety of Fort Laramie and pushed northwest into the vast, unending emptiness of the Badlands. The land was hostile. It was not green and soft like Kansas. This was a place of gray buttes, alkali flats, and rocky ridges that looked like the spine of a dead monster. The dust got into everything. It was a fine, choking powder that coated her tongue and stung her eyes. Clara worked from before sunrise until long after dark. She baked biscuits in Dutch ovens over hot coals, boiled vats of coffee, and wrestled with sacks of beans and dried apples. The work was brutal. It blistered her hands and made her back ache with a fire she had not known was possible. But she welcomed it. When she was exhausted, she could not think. She could not remember the whispers, or the trial, or the way the women in town had pulled their skirts aside when she walked past. She learned the men quickly. They were loud, coarse, and lonely. They treated her with a clumsy, shy respect, calling her ma'am and snatching the food from her hands without meeting her eyes. They were afraid of a widow. She realized a good, grieving widow was a symbol of something holy to them. It made her stomach turn, but she used it. It was her shield. And then there was the other one. His name, she learned from whispers, was Eli Thatcher. He was not a settler. He was not one of the regular teamsters. He was hired muscle, an outrider. He was one of the men Captain Hines paid to ride the perimeter and look for trouble. He was never in camp for long. He rode alone, not with the other scouts. He was a tall man, impossibly tall, made taller by a flat-brimmed, sweat-stained hat. He rode a big, raw-boned roan that looked half wild. He did not speak. Clara had been with the train for a week and had not heard his voice. He would ride in late, take his portion of food without a word, and eat it by himself near the horse line, staring into the dark. The men muttered about him. They gave him space. He had a scar. It was not a thin, white line. It was a thick, ragged ruin of flesh that started below his left ear and pulled his whole jawline tight, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. It made his face look hard, unbalanced, as if he were perpetually bracing for a blow. "That's Thatcher," she heard one of the teamsters, a young man named Brody, mutter to another. "The one Hines hired in Cheyenne." "He looks mean," the other replied, casting a nervous glance. "Mean? He's poison. Heard he killed a sheriff down in Texas. Just shot him in the street and rode off." "Why would Hines hire him? Then?" "Sometimes," Brody said, spitting a stream of tobacco. "You need poison to fight poison. And this is poison country." Clara watched him from the shade of her wagon. He was different from the others. The other men were loud with their loneliness. He was contained. His loneliness was a solid thing, like a stone he carried. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace that seemed strange for a man of his size. He was all hard lines and silence. He was, she thought, a man who was entirely alone, like her. A few days later, the train had to ford a shallow, muddy creek. The bank on the other side was steep, and her heavy chuck wagon became mired in the sucking mud. The oxen strained, their eyes rolling, but the wheels would not budge. Captain Hines rode back, his face red with frustration. "Mrs. Wendell, you are loaded too heavy. We have to lighten you." Clara's face burned. The other wagons were already forming a circle, the settlers watching her. She was holding them up. She was failing. "We need these barrels off," Hines snapped, gesturing to the heavy water casks lashed to the side. Two teamsters jumped down, but the barrels were full and awkward. Clara moved to help, grabbing the rope. "I can—" "Stay back, ma'am," one of them grunted, shoving her aside. She stumbled, her skirt catching in the mud, and then a shadow fell over her. Eli Thatcher was just there. He had dismounted his roan and walked up without a sound. He did not look at her. He did not speak to Hines. He simply put his hands on the first cask, a cask that two men were struggling with, and lifted. The muscles in his back and shoulders bunched under his dusty shirt. He did not just lift it, he controlled it, swinging the 100-pound barrel to the ground with a soft thud. He went to the next one. Clara stared at his hands. They were huge. They were not just calloused. They were a map of old injuries. The knuckles were scarred and busted, the skin stained with rope burns and something darker, like old grease or blood. They were strong, brutal hands. He finished, looped the rope, and gave a single, sharp nod to the driver. The man cracked his whip. The oxen lunged, and the lightened wagon tore free from the mud. By the time Clara had gathered her wits and climbed back to the wagon seat, Eli Thatcher was gone. He was already a quarter-mile ahead, a dark shape riding the ridge, silhouetted against the brassy sky. The storm came 2 weeks out from Laramie. It did not start with rain. It started with a change in the light. The sky turned a sick, greenish yellow. The air became perfectly still. "Sandstorm!" Hines bellowed, his voice carrying over the sudden quiet. "Circle the wagons! Tie down the stock!" It hit them like a solid wall. The wind did not rise, it struck. A howling, screaming force that blasted the wagons with sand and gravel. It was a roar that swallowed all other sound. Clara huddled behind her wagon, trying to cover the dough she had been kneading, but the wind ripped the cloth from her hands. The air was so thick with dust she could not see the next wagon over. It was like being buried alive. She had a small canvas tent, a lean-to against the side of her wagon where she slept. The wind found it, with a sound like a gunshot. One of the main guy ropes snapped. The canvas flapped with thunderous, terrifying violence. It was going to be ripped to shreds, taking half her supplies with it. She lunged for it, grabbing the flapping canvas, and was nearly lifted from her feet. The sand stung her face like needles. She was going to lose it. She was crying, though the tears were instantly dried by the hot wind. And then he was there. He came out of the yellow-gray fog like a ghost. Eli Thatcher. He did not shout. He could not be heard. He simply grabbed the canvas from her, his sheer weight acting as an anchor. He pointed at the ground, a sharp, commanding gesture. She understood. He needed the spare stakes from her toolbox. She scrambled to get them, her eyes streaming. When she returned, he was holding the tent down with one hand, the canvas fighting to tear itself from his grip. He took the stake and the mallet from her. He did not seem to flinch as the wind tried to peel him from the earth. He was calm. He planted the first stake, his movements economical and powerful. He drove it deep into the hard-baked ground with 3 precise, brutal blows. He moved to the next, and the next. He retied the ropes, his scarred hands working fast in the chaos. He was a creature of the storm. The wind did not seem to bother him. It was just another hard thing to be endured. Clara watched, helpless, clutching the wagon wheel. She had never seen a man that big up close. He was not just tall, he was broad, solid as an oak tree. He was a bulwark against the wind. In less than a minute, the tent was secure, staked down tight. He gave one final pull on the rope. Satisfied, he turned, and for a moment, he looked right at her. His eyes were pale, gray or blue, hidden in the shadow of his hat and the sting of the sand. He nodded once, then he dissolved back into the howling dust. That night, the camp was shattered. The storm had passed, leaving a world scoured clean and raw. Several head of cattle had been lost. One wagon had been overturned. People were grim, shaken. Clara lay in her small tent, the one he had saved, listening to the nervous lowing of the remaining cattle. She was almost asleep when the scream came. It was not an animal. It was a man, a sharp, terrified cry of, "Help! God, help me!" Clara's heart stopped. She was out of the tent in an instant, her mind flashing to Indians. She grabbed the first thing she could find, a heavy, black iron skillet. She ran toward the sound, her bare feet stumbling in the dark. The camp was chaos. Men were yelling, grabbing rifles. By the low, dying light of the central campfire, she saw the shape of it. It was not Indians. A cougar, massive and starved, was on top of one of the guards who had been standing watch. The man was screaming, trying to push the animal off, but the cat was all claws and teeth. Clara raised the skillet, but she was too far. She was shaking. Then a shape moved past her, impossibly fast. Eli Thatcher. He had no rifle. He had only the Bowie knife that never left his belt. He did not hesitate. He ran straight at the animal and slammed his body into its flank, knocking it off the screaming guard. The next few seconds were a blur of thrashing, snarling chaos. The man and the animal rolled in the dust. The cougar shrieked, a sound of fury and pain. Clara saw Eli on his back, his arm up to block the cat's jaws as he drove the knife up, under the ribs, once, twice. He threw the animal off him. It staggered, coughed blood, and collapsed. Silence fell, broken only by the guards moaning. Eli stood up. His shirt was torn. He was breathing hard, chest heaving. In the dim firelight, he was covered in blood. It was black and slick on his arms, his chest, and his face. He looked up, and his eyes swept the circle of stunned, terrified settlers. He looked, Clara thought, like a butcher, like a savage. He glanced at the dead animal, then at the wounded man. Without a word, he wiped his knife on his pants, sheathed it, and walked away toward the horse line, disappearing into the shadows. The camp did not sleep again that night. The guard was badly mauled, his arm torn open, but he would live. The talk now was only of Eli Thatcher. He killed it with a knife, Brody whispered, his face pale. Just jumped on it. Who does that? A man's not natural to do that. He's got a price on him, I tell you, another man said, checking the load in his rifle. Hines was a fool to hire him. A man that comfortable with blood. He's a danger. Heard he was run out of Kansas, a woman whispered, and Clara's stomach tightened. Kansas. The name was a sickness. The next morning, Clara saw him by his horse. He was packing his saddlebags, his back to the camp. He was always the first to be ready. She saw the gash on his forearm. The cat had gotten him after all. It was a deep, ragged tear, and he had done nothing but tie a dirty rag around it. She made a decision. She boiled water, took the tin of carbolic salve from her medical stores, and tore a strip from a clean linen sheet. She walked over to him. Her heart was beating a slow, heavy drum against her ribs. He heard her approach and tensed, his hand dropping to the hilt of his knife. He relaxed, just slightly. When he saw it was her. "You're bleeding," she said, her voice quiet. He looked at the rag on his arm. "It's nothing." His voice was rougher than she had expected, low and full of gravel. "It will fester, if you let me." She held out the bowl of water and the clean cloth. He stared at her. His eyes, she saw now, were a pale, cold gray. They were eyes that had seen too much. He looked at her offering as if it were a trick, but he did not pull away. Slowly, as if moving against his own will, he held out his arm. She untied the filthy rag. The wound was deep. She began to clean it. Her hands were gentle. He stood perfectly still, but she could feel the tension in him, like a coiled spring. His skin was hot. She worked silently, cleaning the blood and dirt, spreading the sharp-smelling salve into the wound. She had to wrap the cloth bandage around his arm, her fingers brushing his skin. His hand, the one that had held the knife. It was scarred, just as she had seen, but it was not trembling. Her hands were the ones that shook. "There," she said, tying it off. Their hands touched, her small, work-roughened fingers against his scarred, massive palm. It was a jolt, like static in a dry room. "Thank you," she said, finally looking up at his face. "For last night, you saved that man's life." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. The scar on his jaw tightened. He just nodded, a short, jerky movement. He pulled his arm back as soon as she was finished, turning away from her to check his saddle cinch. He would not meet her gaze. He was a man who knew violence, she thought, but who was terrified of a small kindness. The camp grew tense after that. The attack had frayed everyone's nerves. The settlers looked at Eli with open fear. The teamsters avoided him. He was, once again, completely alone. Clara found herself watching him. He was a puzzle. A man who killed with a knife but was gentle with a rope. A man who faced a cougar but flinched from a woman's thanks. 2 days later, she was walking back from the creek where she did her washing. She passed a wagon where 2 young women, sisters, were mending clothes. They were talking in low, excited voices. "And ran him clean out of town." One was saying, "That's what my pa heard at Laramie. The bounty is for Kansas." Clara slowed her step, her blood turning to ice. "But what for?" the other asked. I don't know, something terrible. But it reminds me of that other story. The one from Wichita, about that preacher's widow." Clara stopped. She felt faint. "The one who cursed her husband?" the girl whispered, her eyes wide. "They say he was a man of God, and she was wicked. They say he fell down dead right in front of her, cursed him dead, just looked at him, and his heart stopped." "Lord preserve us," the other sister breathed. "Imagine having a soul that black." Clara made a small sound. A spoon she was carrying slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the rocks. The girls looked up, startled, and saw her. Clara's face was as white as a sheet. She did not bend to pick up the spoon. She turned and walked away, her steps stiff, her back straight. That night, she could not eat. She sat in the darkness, away from the cheerful noise of the main camp. She sat on the tongue of her wagon, her arms wrapped around her knees, and she trembled. The story was here. It had followed her. Cursed him dead. They did not know the truth, the whiskey, the blows, the terror. They only knew the story. And it was a story that would follow her forever. She was trembling so hard she thought she might break apart. A shadow detached itself from the darkness. She did not even look up, assuming it was one of the teamsters come to bother her. "Please," she whispered, "leave me be." But the man did not leave. He just sat on the wagon tongue near her, a few feet of empty, charged space between them. He did not speak. He just sat, staring out at the dark prairie. It was Eli Thatcher. They sat in silence for a long time. 10 minutes, 20. The only sounds were the crickets and the distant, lonely cry of a coyote. Clara's trembling slowly subsided, replaced by a cold dread. Why was he here? Finally, he spoke. His voice was so low, she barely heard it. "You ain't the only one hiding." She looked up, shocked. Her head snapped toward him. He was not looking at her. He was still staring into the night. He knew. He had heard the whispers, too. He saw the way she flinched at the word Kansas. He saw her. The shared weight of their secrets settled between them, heavy as a shroud. She was looking at him, really looking at him in the dark. He was a shape of stillness, a mountain, a solid, unmoving thing in a world that was trying to tear her apart. She shifted, a small, involuntary movement. Her body was cold. The back of her hand brushed the hard denim covering his thigh. It was like touching a hot stone. He did not flinch, but she felt the muscle jump beneath the fabric. A strange, reckless thought came to her. He was a killer, a pariah. They looked at him and saw a monster. They looked at her and saw a witch. Maybe they were right. She looked at his profile against the faint starlight. His shoulders were so broad. He seemed to take up all the space in the night. "You're bigger than I thought," she whispered. It was not about his size. Not really. It was about the size of his silence, the weight of his presence. He turned his head. He looked away from her, toward the dark prairie, as if her words were a physical blow. A muscle in his scarred jaw tightened. She could not be alone. Not tonight, not with the ghosts of Kansas scratching at her tent. He was the only other person in this whole, miserable train who was as haunted as she was. He was the only one who would not judge. "Come inside," she whispered. The words were out before she could stop them. He did not move. He was made of stone. She stood up. Her legs were shaking. She reached down and took his hand. The big, scarred hand. The one she had bandaged. It was rough, hot. She tugged. It was not a request. It was not a seduction. It was a plea. "Do not leave me alone." He looked at their joined hands. He looked at her face, pale in the darkness, and slowly, heavily, Eli Thatcher stood up. He let her pull him toward the small, dark flap of her cramped canvas tent. He had to stoop to get inside. The moment Eli Thatcher ducked through the flap, the small tent became impossibly cramped. He was a creature of the open plains, and she had dragged him into a space no bigger than a coffin. The canvas flap fell shut, plunging them into a close, warm darkness that smelled of canvas, dried apples, and the faint, clean scent of lye soap that clung to her. He did not sit. He just stood, his broad shoulders hunched, his hat nearly touching the canvas roof. He was a silent, massive shadow, and the tension in the tent was so thick she could not breathe. She had pulled him in, and now she did not know what to do. The silence stretched, tight as a wire. It was the silence that broke her. It was the same silence that had filled her house in Kansas after the screaming stopped. A small sound tore itself from her throat, a choked sob, and then it was all gone. The strength she had used to sign the ledger, to heave the flour sacks, to face the whispers, it crumbled to dust. She slid down the canvas wall and put her face in her hands, and the weeping came. It was not a gentle, mournful cry. It was a raw, ugly sound, torn from a place of deep shame. "They said I cursed him," she gasped, the words muffled by her hands. "They all said it." Eli did not move. He just stood, a pillar of judgment. She thought, but she could not stop. The dam was broken. He was not a good man, she whispered to the dirt floor. He was not a man of God. He drank. He hit me. Admitting it was the worst part. The shame of it burned hotter than the wind. She looked up, her eyes blurred, and saw his shape still standing there. He came home that night. He had a bottle. He said I was barren, a curse. He grabbed the fireplace poker. She was shaking violently now, reliving it. I ran. I pushed him away. I pushed him so hard, he fell. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. He just fell, and he hit his head on the corner of the inn table, and he didn't get up. She looked at Eli, desperate for him to understand. I didn't mean to. I just wanted him to stop. But he was dead, and the women in town, they said I had the devil in me. They said I looked at him, and his heart stopped. They called it a sin. They said, God's judgment. The tent was quiet again, save for her ragged breathing. Eli moved. He did not reach for her. He did not offer a single word of comfort. He just shifted, his boots scraping the ground, and lowered his massive frame onto a wooden crate of dried beans. The crate groaned under his weight. His knees were almost level with his chest, the small space forcing him into a tight crouch. He took off his hat and held it in his hands, turning it by the brim. Texas, he said. His voice was a low rasp, barely disturbing the air. Clara wiped her eyes, sniffing, trying to understand. I shot a man, he said, still looking at the hat in his hands. He was drowning a girl. Clara stared at him, her own grief momentarily suspended. She was just a saloon girl, maybe 16. He was drunk, mad about something, dragged her out of the saloon, right to the horse trough. He was holding her head under, laughing. Eli's hand stopped turning the hat. His knuckles were white. I told him to stop. He didn't, so I shot him. He said it flat, a statement of fact. He fell in the trough with her. I pulled her out. She ran. You saved her, Clara whispered. That's not a sin. That was justice. Eli finally looked up, and his cold, gray eyes met hers in the dark. He was kin, he said, and the word was full of acid. My cousin's brother, my own blood. The rest of the family, they don't care about the girl. They only care about the blood. They put a price on me. I've been running ever since. There it was, the bounty. Kansas, Texas, they were the same. They were ghosts. He did not confess to killing a sheriff. That was a lie the Teamsters told. The truth was worse. It was family. It was a blood feud. She looked at him, the scarred jaw, the brutal hands that had killed a cougar, the stillness. He was a killer, but he had killed to save someone. She had pushed, and a man had died. They were both running from an act of survival that the world had branded a crime. She moved, just a few inches, until her arm was pressed against his. She could feel the heat of him, the coiled strength right through the canvas of his coat and her thin dress. She offered no comfort. He offered none back. They just sat. They did not sleep. They sat together in the cold, cramped dark, arms touching. They listened to the sounds of the camp settling, the horses nickering, the low murmur of the night guard. They sat as two separate, broken things, and for a few hours, they were not alone in the dark. When the first thin gray light of dawn touched the canvas, Eli moved. He was stiff. He stood up, stooping again, and put his hat on his head. He did not look at her. He did not say goodbye. He just lifted the tent flap and stepped out, letting the cold morning air wash in. He was gone, as silent as he had arrived. Clara stayed in her tent, her heart a cold, heavy stone. She had confessed her deepest shame to a killer, and he had, in turn, trusted her with his. She felt raw, exposed, but the trembling had stopped. The train moved on. Deeper into the territory, the land grew harder, the canyon steeper. 3 days after Clara's confession, they were navigating a narrow, winding pass. The walls of red rock rose 500 feet on either side, and the wagon's iron-rimmed wheels made the canyon echo with a sound like grinding teeth. Suddenly, there was a sharp, explosive crack, like a rifle shot. The heavy supply wagon in front of Clara lurched, the back end dropping hard. The driver cursed, and the entire train came to a halt. Captain Hines rode back, his face grim.
"Axel, we've lost a wheel. Damn it all!"
The news spread down the line. They were stuck. The canyon was too narrow to turn around. They would have to make repairs right here. 2 days, Hines announced to the anxious settlers. Maybe 3. We're exposed here, so keep your eyes sharp. We'll post double guards. A feeling of dread settled over the caravan. To be stuck was to be a target. The men set to work jacking up the broken wagon, while the women tried to keep the children calm. Clara built her cook fire near the canyon wall. She was on edge. The men were short-tempered, and their eyes lingered on her. The whispers about Kansas had not died. They had only been amplified by the close quarters. One of the newly posted guards, a man named Silas, was particularly bold. He was a coarse, bearded man who had lost money at cards the night before and was looking for some place to put his sour mood. He watched Clara as she knelt by the fire, kneading dough. Eli was gone, riding scout on the canyon rim, a mile away. Silas sauntered over, hitching his trousers.
"Looks like we're stuck here a good while. Mrs.
Wendell." Clara did not look up.
"Seems so."
Must get mighty lonely for a widow, all these cold nights. He spat a stream of tobacco near her foot. "Heard you had company in your tent the other night." Clara's hands froze in the dough. Her blood ran cold. "That Thatcher," Silas sneered, his voice low and ugly. "He's half wild. Not proper company for a lady. A woman like you. You need a real man to look after you. Someone who ain't wanted for murder." He was close enough that she could smell the stale whiskey on his breath. She felt violated, pinned against the rock wall by his gaze.
"I have work to do, sir,"
she said, her voice shaking but cold.
"Ah, don't be like that."
He chuckled. He reached down and touched a strand of her hair that had come loose from her bun. Clara recoiled. Standing up so fast, she knocked over her bowl of flour.
"Do not touch me."
Silas's eyes narrowed. Feisty, just like the preacher's wife. I like that. He gave her a long, slow look that stripped her bare. "I'm on watch tonight, right near your wagon. Maybe I'll stop by, make sure you're safe." He walked away, laughing to himself. Clara sank back to the ground, her whole body trembling. She looked up at the high canyon rim. A tiny slit of blue sky so far away. Eli was up there. He was too far. She was trapped. That night, the canyon was a pocket of deep, unnatural silence. The camp was nervous. The twin fires cast long, dancing shadows on the rock walls. Clara lay in her tent, fully dressed, her iron skillet in her hand. She had wedged a crate against the tent flap, but she knew it would do no good. She heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, trying to be quiet. They stopped right outside her tent.
"Clara,"
Silas whispered, his voice thick and slurring. "I know you're in there. Don't make me wait. Honey, I'm just here to be friendly." She held her breath. The skillet felt heavy and useless. The crate she had braced against the flap was shoved aside. The canvas flap was torn open. Silas ducked inside, a dark shape against the moonlight. He filled the tent with the smell of whiskey and unwashed wool. "There you are," he grinned. "Playing shy." He lunged for her. Clara screamed. She swung the skillet, but he caught her wrist, twisting it painfully.
"Stop that!"
he hissed, striking her across the face. The blow sent her reeling. He fell on top of her, his weight crushing her. She screamed again, a desperate, hopeless sound. And then he was gone. It happened so fast. Clara did not understand it. One moment Silas was on top of her, his hands tearing at her dress. The next, he was ripped backward, as if by a bolt of lightning. Eli Thatcher was there. He had not come through the flap. He seemed to have materialized from the shadows behind Silas. He had the man by the collar, one hand clamped over his mouth, stifling his grunt of surprise. There was no fight. There was no struggle. Eli did not slam him against a rock. He did not even hit him. He just held him, and with his other hand, he drew his bowie knife and pushed it. Once, deep under Silas's ribs, it was a single, economical, brutal motion. Silas's body went rigid. A terrible, gurgling sound came from his throat. Eli held him for a second longer, letting the life drain out, then shoved the body backward, out of the tent. Silas collapsed in the dust, unmoving. Eli stood in the opening of the tent, breathing hard. He was not bloody. He was just still. He looked down at the man he had just killed. Then he looked at Clara, who was huddled against the far wall, shaking, her hand to her stinging cheek. His gaze was not angry. It was not triumphant. It was flat, empty. It was the look of a man confirming what he already knew about himself. He stepped back, wiped his knife on Silas's shirt, and sheathed it. He did not say a word. He just turned and disappeared into the darkness between the wagons. The camp was in an uproar by dawn. The discovery of Silas's body sent a wave of terror through the settlers. But this time, it was not fear of cougars or Indians. It was fear of the man among them. Hines convened a meeting. The men gathered, rifles in hand. Eli stood apart, by his horse. He was already packed. He had known this was coming.
He killed him,
Brody shouted, pointing at Eli.
Stuck him like a pig. We saw the body.
He was a danger, Hines said, his face like stone. But we are not animals. Thatcher, we do not murder men in the dark. Clara ran from her tent. Her cheek was bruised, her dress still torn at the collar. "No!" she cried, her voice hoarse. "You don't understand. He saved me." The men turned to look at her. Their faces were hard, judgmental. "Silas, he came into my tent," she said, her voice breaking with shame. He attacked me. Eli stopped him." Hines looked at her, his expression cold. "Ma'am, Silas is dead. He cannot defend his name. All we see is one of our guards murdered, and we all know you and Thatcher." He did not finish the sentence, but he did not have to. The way the women stared at her said everything. She was the killer's woman, the cursed widow. Her word meant nothing. "You're done, Thatcher," Hines said, turning back to Eli. "You are a danger to this company. We are decent folk. We won't hang you, but you will ride. Now, and if we see you again, we will shoot you on sight." Eli looked at the circle of angry, frightened faces. He said nothing. He simply swung his leg over his roan.
"No!"
Clara screamed.
"You cannot! He is the only—"
But the men raised their rifles. They did not point them at Eli. They pointed them at the ground. A silent, grim barrier between her and him. Eli looked at her. It was a long, deep look. It was a look of resignation. He saw her trying to defend him, and he saw the bruises on her face. He saw that, by saving her, he had damned her too. He turned his horse and rode out of the canyon, not looking back. Clara watched him go. The camp turned its back on her. The silence was absolute. She was more alone now than she had been in Kansas. She stood there for an hour. Then she went to her wagon. She did not pack much: a canteen of water, a sack of hardtack, the small tin of salve. She untied one of the spare pack mules. "Ma'am, what are you doing?" Brody asked, his voice uneasy. Clara turned to him. Her eyes were dry. The bruise on her cheek was darkening. "I am leaving." "You cannot go alone," he said, alarmed. "You will not last a day." "I would rather face the wilderness than this," she said, her voice quiet but vibrating with a cold fire. No one stopped her. They watched her ride the mule out of the canyon, following the tracks of the banished killer. They were relieved to see her go. She rode all afternoon. The land was empty, hostile. She was terrified. Every shadow looked like a threat. But she kept the roan's tracks in sight. He was not trying to hide. He was just moving. As dusk settled, the sky turned a bruised purple. She found him. He had camped in a draw, sheltered by a high ridge of sandstone. He had a small fire going, just enough to boil coffee. His horse was cropping at the dry grass nearby. He heard her before he saw her. He was on his feet in an instant, knife in hand. When he saw it was her on the mule, his face hardened into a mask of anger. "Go back, Clara," he said, his voice flat. "I cannot," she said, sliding off the mule. Her legs were trembling from the long ride. "There is nothing for you here. Go back. They will take you in." "No, they will not," she said, walking toward his fire. They looked at me the same way they did in Kansas, like I am the one who is poison." He turned away from her, staring into the fire. "I am poison. You see what I am. I bring death. Go back to them. You deserve peace." The words snapped her patience. She was tired, she was sore, and she was angry. "Peace!" she cried, her voice echoing in the draw. "You think I had peace before? You think my husband gave me peace? You think I do not know what it is to have blood on my hands?" She was shouting at him now, tears of rage and frustration streaming down her face. "You think I don't already carry fire?" He turned to look at her. The question hung in the air between them. A cold wind swept down the draw. The fire guttered. A drop of rain hit the hot stone beside the fire. Hissing, then another. In seconds, the sky opened. It was not a gentle rain. It was a cold, driving, brutal plain storm. The fire was extinguished in an instant. Clara gasped, shivering as the freezing water soaked her thin dress. She was so cold, so tired, and so utterly lost. She did not think, she just moved. She crossed the small space between them and clung to him. She buried her face against the rough, wet canvas of his coat, her hands grabbing fistfuls of his shirt. "Do not leave me," she sobbed. "Please, do not leave me alone out here." Eli stood rigid. He was a statue of iron. He did not hold her. His hands were clenched at his sides. He was resisting, fighting himself. He was a man who had been alone for so long. He did not know how to be anything else. He was afraid to touch her. "Clara," he ground out, as if in pain. "Please," she wept into his chest. The rain was plastering her hair to her head, and she was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. He swore, a low, harsh sound, and then his arms came up. They did not hold her gently. They crushed her to him. He wrapped his arms around her as if he were holding himself together, one hand tangling in her wet hair, pulling her head tight against his shoulder. He held her with a desperate, animal strength. "I ain't used to soft hands," he murmured, his voice a rough vibration against her ear. "I ain't used to this." He pulled her out of the driving rain, backing them both under the shallow overhang of the rock ridge. It was not a cave, just a lean-to of stone, but it blocked the worst of the wind. They sank to the ground, huddled together. He took his bedroll and wrapped it around both of them. It was not enough. They were both soaked, and the night was cold, but they had each other's warmth. They sat in the dark, the storm raging around them. The guilt was there, the grief, the blood they both had on their hands. He pulled back, just enough to see her face in the gloom. Her eyes were closed, her face pale and stained with tears. He touched her bruised cheek with his thumb, his touch surprisingly gentle. "He hurt you?" he whispered. It was not a question. "It doesn't matter," she breathed, opening her eyes. She was looking at his mouth. He was looking at hers. It was not a soft, tender moment. It was inevitable. It was the last two damned souls on earth finding each other in the dark. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. He kissed her, The kiss was rough, desperate. It tasted of rain and smoke and the iron tang of his confession. It was clumsy, full of teeth and want. It was not the kiss of a gentle lover. It was the kiss of a drowning man. She kissed him back with the same desperation, clinging to him, her fingers digging into his shoulders. It was a kiss of grief and guilt and a terrible, defiant hunger to be alive. He pulled away, breathing hard. He rested his forehead against hers. They did not speak again. They just held each other under the lean-to, sharing the thin blanket, their body warmth, and the terrible weight of what they were. They finally slept, huddled together against the storm. The world was gray when Clara woke. She was stiff and cold to the bone. The rain had stopped, leaving the air washed clean and sharp, smelling of wet stone and sage. Eli was already standing, his back to her, staring out of the draw. The intimacy of the night, their shared warmth and the desperate, bruising kiss had evaporated with the storm. He was a statue again, his shoulders set, his hat pulled low. He had not just taken shelter with her, he had confessed his deepest wound. She had confessed hers. They were bound now, by more than just a blanket. "We should go back," she said, her voice a croak. Eli did not turn. "They will not want you. They surely will not want me." "My wagon is there," she said, forcing herself to stand. Her whole body ached. "My things. I am not running anymore. Eli, I am tired of running." He finally looked at her. He saw the purple bruise on her cheek, a stark mark against her pale skin. He saw the dried mud on her skirt and the stubborn set of her jaw. He gave a single, short nod. The ride back to the canyon was silent. There was nothing to say. The kiss hung between them, unspoken, a new and dangerous thing. He rode his roan, and she followed on the mule. Two banished ghosts returning to the place that had cast them out. They smelled it before they saw it. A heavy, eki, greasy smoke that choked the air and burned the back of the throat. It was not the clean scent of a cook fire. It was the smell of ruin. Eli spurred his horse, galloping the last quarter-mile to the canyon rim. He pulled up, his body tensing, and Clara, on her slower mule, came up beside him. She looked down, and her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. It was not a camp, it was a boneyard. The narrow pass was a scene of unbelievable destruction. 3 wagons, including her own, were black, smoking skeletons. The canvas was gone, the hoops like the ribs of a dead animal. Cattle were scattered, many of them dead, arrows protruding from their flanks. But it was the other shapes, the ones covered with blankets, that made her blood run cold. "Stay here," Eli ordered, his voice flat and hard. He drew his rifle from its saddle scabbard. He urged his horse down the steep path. Clara hesitated for only a second before kicking her mule to follow. She would not hide. Not again. Survivors were huddled near the broken wagon they had been repairing. A woman was weeping, a high, thin sound that cut through the smoky air. Brody, the young teamster, sat on the ground, holding a bloody rag to the side of his head. Captain Hines was leaning against a wagon wheel, his face gray as ash. He looked 10 years older. Clara slid off her mule and ran to him. "Captain, what happened? Was it Indians?" Hines looked up. His eyes were empty, devastated. "No," he rasped. "Not Indians. Not at first." It was Brody who saw Eli. The young man's grief and fear turned in an instant to a pure, white-hot rage. "You!" he screamed, staggering to his feet. He pointed a shaking finger at Eli. You did this!" Eli had dismounted and was checking one of the blanket-covered forms. He straightened up slowly, his hand dropping to rest near the hilt of his knife. "You murdering bastard!" Brody shouted, his voice cracking. "It was a trap. You led them right to us. Silas was right about you. He was right." The other survivors, a handful of men and women, turned to stare at Eli. Their faces were not just grieving, they were full of hate. Clara stepped between them, placing herself directly in Brody's path.
That is a lie,
she cried.
He was with me. We were miles from here. He was with me the entire night.
A woman, her face black with soot, gave a bitter, ugly laugh. Oh, we know where he was. You harlot, that is the point. You left with him. You distracted him. Or you were part of it. The moment you two were clear, he brought his cutthroat friends down on us. Harlot. The word struck Clara with the force of a physical blow. It was worse than Silas's hand.
He saved my life,
Clara insisted, her voice shaking.
He protected me.
He murdered Silas, Brody yelled. Silas was a guard, and now, because of you, they're gone. A cold dread washed over Clara. What do you mean? Who is gone? The weeping woman looked up, her eyes vacant with horror.
My Mary, and the Miller boy, they took the children.
The words did not make sense. Took them. Hines finally spoke, his voice a dead monotone. It was raiders, bushwhackers. They hit us just before dawn. They knew we were trapped. They knew exactly where the guards were. They killed 3 men before we even knew what was happening. He looked at Eli. They were white men. They spoke English. They set the fires, shot the stock, and they took the 2 children. Because he told them, Brody shrieked, lunging, only to be held back by another man. It was a plan. Get banished, then lead the raid. You wanted the payroll. Eli just stood there. He did not deny it. He did not defend himself. He just soaked up their accusations, his face a mask of stone. He had been tried and found guilty by lesser men before. Clara's mind was racing. This was not a raid for supplies. It was an abduction.
Then we have to go after them,
she said, her voice sharp with a new, sudden authority. Hines shook his head, a gesture of complete defeat. We are broken. Mrs. Wendell. We have 4 wounded. We have almost no horses left fit to ride. They are gone. We must bury our dead and try to move on.
Move on?
Clara looked from Hines's broken face to the sobbing mother.
They are children.
She strode forward until she was standing over Hines. The camp went quiet.
Captain,
she said, her voice low and vibrating with a cold fury. You are the leader of this train. You will not sit here and let this happen. You will take your best men, and you will get those children back.
I cannot risk the rest of the company,
Hines whispered, his eyes on the ground.
I cannot. It is God's will.
To hell with God's will, Clara spat. The words, coming from the preacher's widow, made every survivor flinch. This is not God's work. This is our work. She saw it was no use. Hines was a broken man. The other men were beaten, terrified. She turned. There was only one man in the canyon who was not. She walked past the burned wagons, past the bodies, straight to Eli. He watched her come, his expression unreadable. The entire camp watched her. She stopped a foot in front of him. They blame you, she said, her voice low, for him alone. He nodded. Just once. They always need to blame someone like me. Are you going to let them be right? She challenged. He stared at her. It is not my fight, Clara.
They are children,
she pleaded, her newfound anger giving way to desperation.
Eli, please, you told me. You saved that girl in Texas. It is the same thing. They are taking them.
He looked past her, at the weeping mother, at the broken men who had just tried to condemn him. His jaw tightened. He wanted to ride. He wanted to be 1,000 miles from this.
Please,
she whispered, her voice breaking.
Do not do it for them. Do it for me. I am asking you.
He held her gaze for a long, heavy moment. He saw the bruise he had failed to prevent. He saw the desperation. He saw the one person on earth who had looked at him and not seen a monster. He let out a short, bitter breath. Get your mule, he said, his voice rough, and find a rifle that works. He turned on his heel and strode toward Hines. I am going after them. The captain looked up, stunned. I need 2 men, Eli said, 2 who can ride and shoot, and your 3 best horses, if you have them. Brody scrambled to his feet.
I am going. That was my cousin's boy. I am going.
Another man, a quiet farmer named Gideon with watchful eyes, stepped forward. I can track, he said. I'll go.
Just 3?
Clara asked, coming up behind Eli.
3 is fast,
Eli said, not looking at her. We will be 4. You are coming. Hines's head snapped up.
Ma'am, that is impossible. It is a suicide.
She rides with me, Eli said. The words were final. She is the only one here with any spine left. He looked at Hines. Get us food, water, ammunition, whatever you have. We ride in 10 minutes. The paralyzed camp was shocked into motion. Grief gave way to a frantic, desperate purpose. Clara ran to what was left of her wagon. It was a smoking ruin, but her sturdy medical tin had been thrown clear. She grabbed it, a bag of hardtack, and a canteen. From the ground near a dead teamster, she picked up a Spencer carbine. It was heavy and smelled of burned oil. Her husband had shown her how to use one. Long ago, she had loaded it. She had aimed it at bottles on a fence, but she had never fired it in anger. She shoved a box of cartridges into her pocket and met Eli at the horse line. He, Brody, and Gideon were mounted on the only 3 decent animals left. He tethered her mule to his saddle. Stay behind me, he ordered, and do not make a sound. They rode out of the canyon. The survivors watched them go. A tiny, doomed party of 4, heading into the vast, cruel wilderness. The tracks were easy to follow at first. 3 horses, 2 of them riding heavy, carrying the children. Eli set a punishing pace, not speaking, his eyes constantly scanning the ridges, his rifle resting across his lap. They left the canyon and entered a maze of broken land. The grassy plains gave way to steep, rocky hills cut by dry arroyos. The ground was shale that slipped under the horses' hooves and was covered in thickets of mesquite and a spiky, thorny plant that tore at their clothes and the animals' legs. The wilderness was not just empty. It was hostile. It was a land of thorns. Clara's body, already aching, screamed in protest. She was not made for this. After 2 hours, her mule was lagging. Eli reined in, his face tight with impatience. Without a word, he dismounted, pulled her from the mule's back, and lifted her onto his roan, seating her behind the saddle. Hold on, he grunted, and swung up in front of her. She had to wrap her arms around his waist. It was a strange, sudden intimacy. There was no tenderness in it. It was pure function, but she could feel the hard, lean strength of his back against her chest. She could feel the way he moved with the horse, as if they were one animal. She held on, her face pressed between his shoulder blades, and they moved faster. Gideon found the first sign in the late afternoon, a small, blue ribbon, snagged on a thorn bush. Brody, riding alongside, let out a choked sound. That is Mary's. Her mother tied it in her hair this morning. A current of cold fear went through Clara. They were on the right path. Later, they found a spot of blood on a flat rock. Not a lot, just a few dark, dried drops. It was Gideon who found the moccasin print near a dry stream bed. He dismounted, kneeling for a closer look. Eli reined in, and the others stopped. This is strange, Gideon said, rubbing his chin. What is it? Eli asked, his voice low. The print. It is not Sioux. It is not Cheyenne. The heel is worn wrong, and the stitch pattern. It looks like something a white man would buy at a trading post. So, white men, Brody said, his voice shaking with rage. Maybe, Gideon said. But look where they are heading. He pointed not west, toward the mountains. but southeast. They are heading back toward the river, back toward the settlements.
Eli, who had been scanning the tracks, spoke. They are not Indians, he said, his voice flat and certain. This is not a war party. A war party would have taken all the stock. They would have finished us. This is something else. Clara, her arms still locked around him, felt him tense. What? She whispered.
Ransom, Eli said. Or worse, these are white men. Men run out of other places. They know the army pays for captives, sometimes.
Or they mean to sell them. They are not running to hide. They are running to a market.
The idea of a market for children made Clara feel physically ill. She held on to Eli tighter, as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had gone insane. They made a cold camp as the sun set. No fire, the risk was too great. Eli said they were only a few hours behind. They ate dry hardtack and drank lukewarm water, huddled in the darkness. Brody and Gideon, exhausted by the ride and the grief, fell into a fitful, restless sleep. Clara was wide awake. Every muscle in her body was a separate, throbbing knot of pain. Eli was taking the first watch. He sat a few yards away, leaning against a boulder, his rifle across his knees, staring into the dark. He was so still. He could have been one of the rocks.
You knew, she whispered, her voice barely carrying.
He did not move. Knew what? What kind of men they were, back at the camp. You knew it was not Indians. I know the kind of men who haunt the edges of the trails, he said, his voice a low rumble. Men who've run out of chances. Men like me.
You are not like them,
she said fiercely. He almost laughed, a short, bitter sound. They would disagree. So would Hines. The silence settled between them again, heavy and cold. She looked at his profile against the faint moonlight. The scar on his jaw was a pale, ragged line.
Eli,
she whispered, the question tearing out of her before she could think. Have you ever just wanted to die? She was shocked by her own words. It was her own secret, the one she'd had in Kansas, spoken aloud. Have you ever just wanted to stop running? He was very still for a long time. The only sound was the wind hissing through the dry grass. He looked up at the cold, pinprick stars. Sometimes, he said. His voice was so low, it was almost not there. Sometimes I think I already did, back in Texas, and when I pulled that trigger. The man who has been riding ever since, he is not really alive. He is just moving. Her heart broke for him. It broke for the man who had saved a girl and lost himself in the act. She pushed herself up, her joints protesting, and crossed the small space between them. She sat beside him, not touching, just near. You are alive, she whispered. You saved me. You are saving those children. That is not a man who is dead. He turned his head to look at Burr. His gray eyes were full of a deep, ancient weariness. She reached out. Her hand was shaking. She laid it on top of his. His hand was like stone, cold and hard from the rifle stock, covered in scars. He did not pull away. He did not move at all. He just sat there, letting her hand rest on his. But after a long, silent moment, his thumb, just his thumb, moved. It brushed once against the back of her hand, a single, small, reluctant acknowledgement. She left her hand there, and they kept watch together. They were riding before dawn. Eli was relentless. He pushed the horses, his face a grim mask. By midday, Gideon, who was riding ahead, raised his hand. They reined in. "What is it?" Eli called. "Smoke," Gideon said, pointing. They were at the edge of a deep, wide ravine. Eli and Clara dismounted. They crept on their bellies to the edge and looked down. Half hidden, built into the far side of the ravine, was a small, dilapidated shack. It was a dugout, half sod, half raw timber. A thin, lazy wisp of smoke trickled from a mud-caked chimney. A single horse was tied to a rail out front. "They are in there," Eli said.
"What do we do?"
Brody whispered, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold his rifle. "We wait," Eli said. They lay on the ridge for an hour, the hot sun beating on their backs. It was a test of patience. Finally, the door of the shack opened. A large, bearded man stepped out. He stretched, scratched his belly, and went back inside, leaving the door ajar. "Just one?" Brody asked. "I counted tracks for 3, Eli said. "We assume 3. Gideon, you and I go down. We go from the back. There does not look to be a window. Brody, you stay here. You have the high ground. You have the best shot."
"What about me?"
Clara said. Eli turned to her. "You stay here, with the horses. That is an order." "No," she said. She was not the woman from Kansas. She was not the woman from the wagon train. "I have a rifle. I can shoot. I will watch the front." He stared at her, a muscle in his scarred jaw twitching. He was about to argue, but he saw the look in her eyes. It was not fear. It was fire. He grunted. "Fine. 100 yards back. On that ridge." He pointed. "It gives you a clear view of the door. If anything comes out that door, you shoot. Do you understand me? Clara, you shoot."
Yes."
"Brody, you cover the side. Gideon, you are with me. We kick the door. We go in fast. We go in hard." Clara's heart was a drum, beating so hard against her ribs she thought it would break. She crawled to the ridge Eli had pointed out. She lay on her stomach, resting the heavy rifle on a flat rock. She lined up the sights on the dark, open doorway. She could barely breathe. She watched Eli and Gideon slip down into the ravine, disappearing from her sight. Brody was a still shape on the other ridge. The world went utterly silent. Then she heard it, a crash, the sound of a door being kicked in. A shout, a gunshot, another, 3 all at once, a deafening, echoing roar in the ravine. Yelling, a man's scream. The front door burst open. The big bearded man stumbled out. He was clutching his arm, and he had a pistol in his other hand. He was turning, aiming back into the dark doorway of the shack. Clara heard Eli's voice, a desperate roar. "Clara, shoot! Now!" She froze. Her finger was on the trigger. He was a man, a living man. "Clara!" Eli bellowed again, from inside the dark. The bearded man leveled his pistol, aiming into the doorway. Clara closed her eyes. She did not aim. She just pulled the trigger. The rifle bucked, slamming the metal butt plate into her shoulder with a force that stole her breath. The noise was deafening. She opened her eyes, gasping. The man in front of the shack was on the ground. He was not moving. She stared. She had... The world went silent again. Then, from inside the shack, she heard a high, thin sound, a child crying. She dropped the rifle, scrambled to her feet, and ran down the steep, shale-covered slope. She was slipping, sliding, half falling, her skirt tearing. She reached the doorway and stopped. The smell of gunpowder and blood hit her like a wall. Gideon was leaning against the wall, a dark stain spreading on his thigh, but he was alive. Inside, another man was dead on the floor. Eli was standing over him, his chest heaving, his knife in his hand. In the back corner, 2 small children, a girl of 8 and a boy of 6, were tied together with a length of rope. They were staring, their eyes wide with terror. "Mary!" Brody yelled, running in past Clara. "Oh, God, Mary!" Clara ran to the children, her hands fumbling with the knots. "It is all right," she murmured, her voice shaking. "You are safe. You are safe now." She got them free. Brody grabbed the girl, who was his cousin, and held her. Clara picked up the little boy, who clung to her neck. She backed out of the shack, away from the death, into the sunlight. She set the boy down gently, and then she turned, fell to her knees in the dirt, and was violently sick. Her body convulsed, her mind screaming at what she had done. She had killed a man. Clara Wendell, had taken a human life. She was still on her knees, shaking and crying, when she felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up. It was Eli. "You did good, Clara," he said, his voice rough. I... She could not speak. "You saved my life," he said. He had a bead right on me. She looked up at his face, and that was when she saw it. The blood. A dark, steady stream soaking the sleeve of his shirt, just above the elbow. "You are hit," she whispered, her own horror vanishing, replaced by a new, sharp terror. "It is just a graze," he said, but his face was pale, his lips tight. "Sit down." Her voice was not a request. It was a command. The cook, the nurse, the woman who acted was back. She ran to her mule, grabbed her medical tin. "Brody, get the children on your horse! Gideon, let me see that leg!" She pushed Eli down against the wall of the shack, just feet from the man she had shot. She did not care. "Let me see." She ripped his sleeve open. It was not a graze. The bullet had torn a deep, ragged furrow through the muscle of his arm. It was bleeding badly. "Damn it, Eli!" she breathed. She pulled out her bandages and the tin of salve. "Save that," he grunted, his voice weak. "For Gideon." "Gideon's is clean," she snapped. "Yours. This is bad." She took her petticoat, the last clean cloth she had, and ripped a long strip from it. She tied it tight above the wound, a makeshift tourniquet. "Not too tight," he gasped. "I know what I am doing," she said. Her hands were perfectly steady now, even as tears streamed down her face. She packed the wound with the carbolic salve and wrapped it tight with the rest of the cloth. "You fool," she said, her voice thick and choked. "You absolute, stupid fool rushing in like that. Clara." "Don't you dare leave me now," she said, her voice breaking. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his good shoulder, her tears falling onto his bloody shirt. "Do you hear me? Do not you dare die. I just found you." He was quiet. His good hand, the one not covered in blood, came up. He touched her hair, his fingers gentle. "I am not planning on it," he whispered. She pulled back. Her face was a mess of dirt, tears, and now his blood. She looked at him, this killer, this savior, this man she had just killed for. He looked at her, his gray eyes full of something she had never seen. Not just pain, not just want, something softer, something that looked like he was breaking. He leaned in, slowly, as if the movement cost him everything. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, hungry kiss from the storm. This was slow. It was tender. It was a kiss that tasted of gunpowder and dirt and a terrible, aching relief. He kissed her there in the dust, in the shadow of the shack, surrounded by death. He pulled away, his eyes searching hers. "I thought I did not deserve this," he whispered, his voice raw. Something clean, like you." Clara shook her head. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. She thought of the man lying 10 feet away. She thought of her husband on the floor in Kansas. "I am not clean, Eli," she whispered back. Her hand came up, cupping his scarred jaw. "I do not deserve it either." She took a ragged breath. "But I want it." He closed his eyes, leaning his face into her hand. "Then we will take it," he said. The journey back to the canyon was a slow, agonizing crawl. Gideon, the quiet farmer, was pale, his leg tied up tight, but he was tough, his jaw set. Eli was worse. He had lost a lot of blood, and the arm, which Clara had rebandaged, was a throbbing, swollen mass. He swayed in the saddle, but he did not slow down.
his face a mask of gray, sweat-soaked stone. Clara rode the mule, her rifle across her lap, her mind numb. The act of pulling the trigger, the buck of the gun, the way the man had fallen. It played over and over in her head. She had taken a life. She felt sick, but she also felt a strange, cold calm. She had done it to save Eli. She would do it again. When they came over the ridge, the camp saw them. They were not a triumphant rescue party. They were 4 bloody, exhausted ghosts, leading 2 terrified, silent children. A woman screamed. It was Mrs. Miller, the boy's mother. She ran forward, stumbling over the rocks, and tore her son from Clara's arms, crushing him to her, weeping with a sound that was more animal than human. Brody slid from his horse and half carried, half dragged his cousin Mary to her parents. For a moment, the camp was a swirl of raw, joyful relief. People were touching the children, crying, thanking God. Hines, his face a wreck of shame and gratitude, limped forward. You did it, he stammered, looking at Eli. You brought them back. Brody, his face tear-streaked, looked at Eli with a terrible, confused expression. Eli, he killed 2 of them, went in first, and Gideon got the last one, the one in the back. Clara saw Brody's lie. He had not fired a shot. He was protecting her, or perhaps he was protecting himself from the shame of his own fear. Clara said nothing. She let the lie stand. But Gideon, leaning heavily on another man, shook his head. No, he said, his voice quiet but clear. That is not what happened. The third one, he came out the front. He would have killed Eli. Mrs. Wendell. She shot him. From the ridge. A single shot. The camp went dead silent. The joy evaporated. All eyes turned to Clara. They looked at her, truly looked at her. The preacher's widow, the cursed woman. She was not the soft, grieving creature they had tolerated. She was covered in dirt and Eli's blood. Her dress was torn. Her face was bruised. She was holding a carbine, and she had killed a man. They no longer looked at Eli as just a threat. He was a savior, a dangerous tool that had, this time, been pointed in the right direction. But Clara, she was something else. She had crossed a line. She was, as the woman had spat, the killer's woman. She had become like him. No one thanked her. Mrs. Miller, still clutching her son, took a step back, pulling the boy away from Clara's presence. Get them to the wagons, Hines ordered, his voice hollow. He looked at Eli. Get that arm seen too. We are in your debt. Thatcher. All of us. For 2 days, the camp was a place of ghosts. They buried their dead. They worked to repair the 2 remaining wagons, cannibalizing the burned ones for parts. They were almost ready to move. Eli lay in the shade of a wagon, feverish. Clara tended to him. She boiled water and cleaned the wound. It was infected, the flesh around it an angry red, streaked with black. She could feel the heat of his skin. He slept most of the time, a restless, muttering sleep, but he never called out. When he was awake, he just watched her. He did not speak. His presence in the camp, even wounded, was a heavy, silent weight. The camp was split. Brody and Gideon, and the families of the rescued children, treated Clara and Eli with a new, solemn respect. But the others, they whispered. They stayed away. On the 3rd day, a man arrived. He was a traveler riding east, a merchant named Abernathy, who had been delayed at a trading post and was trying to catch up with another party. He stopped at the camp, asking for news of the trail. Hines offered him coffee. Abernathy was a portly man, dressed in a dusty suit, and he was talkative, grateful for the company. He walked through the camp, and his eyes landed on Clara as she was carrying a bucket of water from the creek. He stopped, his mouth falling open. "Well, I'll be," he said, squinting. "Mercy me, I know you." Clara froze. The bucket slipped in her hand, water sloshing over the rim. Abernathy waddled closer, his eyes wide with recognition and a kind of greasy excitement. You are Mrs. Blackwood, Sarah Blackwood, from Wichita, the preacher's wife." Clara's blood turned to ice. Sarah, her real name, a name she had not heard in 6 months. It felt like a stranger's. You must be mistaken, sir," she whispered, her voice tight. "My name is Wendell, Clara Wendell." "No, it is you!" he insisted, his voice rising, drawing the attention of the others. "I'd never forget that face. My sister-in-law was in your husband's congregation. The Reverend Blackwood. Lord, the scandal." The women who had been mending a torn canvas top stopped their work. Brody and Hines turned. "Scandal, sir?" Hines asked, his voice sharp. "Oh," Abernathy said, realizing he had an audience. He lowered his voice, but it was a conspiratorial, carrying whisper. "The poor man, a man of God, struck down in his own home. They said she did it." He pointed a thick finger at Clara. "They said she was unfaithful, that she had a terrible temper, that she killed him, cursed him. Some said, but I heard she struck him with a candlestick." The camp was silent, absorbing the words, the whispers that had followed Clara, the ones about the preacher's widow and Kansas, all snapped into sharp, ugly focus. "She is not a widow from Gettysburg," one of the women breathed, her face a mask of horror and revulsion. "She is a murderess." "And she took up with him," another spat, gesturing to where Eli lay, half-conscious, under the wagon. "Of course she did. They are the same. A pair of killers." Clara stood there, the water bucket at her feet. She could not move. She could not breathe. It was here, the thing she had run from. It had finally caught her. Hines stepped forward, his face hard. "Is this true, ma'am? Is your name Blackwood?" Clara looked at the circle of hostile, frightened faces. She looked at the women pulling their children back. She looked at Mrs. Miller, who just yesterday had been weeping with gratitude for her son, and who now looked at Clara as if she were a snake. She was so tired. She was tired of the lies. She was tired of hiding. She let out a long, slow breath. She raised her chin. She said nothing. She did not need to. Her silence was a confession. "My God," Hines whispered. You brought this onto our train. You lied to me. "We should turn her in," Brody said, his voice cold. The gratitude he had felt was gone, replaced by the righteous anger of the camp. "The next fort is Fort Reno. We can hand her over to the army. They will know what to do." "Yes," a woman agreed, her voice shrill. "We cannot travel with her. She is a curse. Look what has happened since she arrived. The storm, the raid. She is unclean." Clara shouldered the blame. She did not fight. She just stood there, absorbing their hatred. It was familiar. It was the same look she had seen in the courtroom in Kansas. She had run 1,000 miles, only to find the same faces, the same judgment. "You will stay in your tent," Hines said, his voice hard as iron. "We will decide what to do with you in the morning." "No." The voice was not Clara's. It was a low, rough growl. Eli Thatcher was on his feet. He was swaying, his face pale and slick with fever, his wounded arm held tight to his chest. But he was standing. He walked, his steps unsteady but deliberate, until he was standing next to Clara. He was a full head taller than any man there, and even wounded. He was a terrifying sight. He looked at Hines. He looked at Brody. He looked at the merchant, Abernathy, who shrank back. "You will not touch her," Eli said. "Thatcher, this is not your concern." Hines snapped. "She is a murderess. She must face the law. She is my wife." The lie was so stark, so bold. It stunned the camp into silence. Clara's head snapped around, her eyes wide with shock. She stared at him. Eli did not look at her. He kept his cold, gray, fever-bright eyes locked on Hines. We were married by a traveling justice, Eli said, his voice flat. In Cheyenne, before we joined this train. Her name is Clara Thatcher. Hines was speechless. You lied, both of you. She is mine, Eli said, and the words cut through the air. He stepped slightly in front of Clara, shielding her with his body. That is all there is. You will not turn her in. You will not lay a hand on her. She is under my protection. This is a decent train, a woman shrieked. We will not have them with us. We will not. Stared at the tall, wounded killer and the silent, disgraced woman beside him. He was not a strong man, but he was a captain. He had lost too much. He could not risk a mutiny. He could not risk keeping them, and he was, in his own way, a righteous man. You are right, Hines said, his voice full of weariness. We will not have them. We cross the river at dawn. You, he said, pointing to Eli and Clara, will not cross with us. We will leave you supplies, enough for a week. After that, you are on your own. God have mercy on your souls. Eli just nodded, as if this was the only outcome he had ever expected. He put his good hand on the small of Clara's back and steered her away from the crowd, back toward the wagon. He did not let them see him stumble. The morning brought a cold, driving rain. The world was gray mist and sucking mud. The camp was a frantic mess of shouting men and lowing cattle. They were at the river, a wide, brown, fast-moving current. Eli and Clara stood apart, near a stand of cottonwood trees. Their supplies were in a small, pathetic pile at their feet. A sack of flour, a side of bacon, a bag of beans, and 2 blankets. They had his roan and her mule. Eli's fever was worse. He was burning up, but he stood straight, watching the camp. Clara's hands were raw. She had tried to lift a heavy, mud-soaked crate, a part of her old supplies, and the rope had torn the skin from her palms. They were blistering in the cold rain. She watched as the wagons began the dangerous crossing. One by one, the men yelling, the animals slipping and straining in the heavy mud. No one looked at them. No one said goodbye. Not even Brody, not even Gideon. They had been erased. The last wagon, Hines's wagon, pulled onto the bank on the far side. The wagon train, smaller and broken, reformed its line and began to move west, disappearing into the rain. Clara and Eli were alone. The silence that fell was profound. There was nothing but the sound of the rain and the rushing river. Well, Clara whispered, her voice rough. She looked down at her blistered, useless hands. He said he would leave us supplies. He did not say he would help us pack them. Eli looked at her. He looked at her hands. He looked at the rain plastering her hair to her face. He was sick. His arm was on fire, and they were 100 miles from anything. We go west, he said, his voice a rasp. Over the mountains, not along the trail. They will be watching the trail. They? My kin, he said. The word was a curse. They spent an hour loading the animals. It was a miserable, clumsy business. Clara's hands were screaming in pain. Eli could only use his one good arm, and every movement sent a jolt of pain through his body. The mud was ankle deep, and it fought them for every step. They finally set out, turning their backs to the river, heading west, up into the rocky, pine-covered foothills. For 3 days, they traveled. The world was a blur of rain, mud, and pain. The mountains were not forgiving. They were steep, the passes narrow and choked with wind. Clara's physical strength gave out completely. The adrenaline of the raid, the shock of the banishment, it was all gone. All that was left was a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. She was not a pioneer. She was a preacher's wife from Kansas. She was soft. On the 4th day, she fell, She was leading the mule, and her foot slipped on a wet rock. She did not have the strength to catch herself. She just collapsed into the mud. "Clara," Eli said, stopping his horse. "I cannot," she whispered, her face pressed to the cold, wet ground. "I cannot get up. Eli, I cannot go another step. Just leave me. You will move faster."
"Get up," he said, his voice hard.
"No," she wept, the tears hot on her cold cheeks. I am done. I am so tired. Just let me sleep." He dismounted. It was a slow, painful process. He swayed on his feet, his face ashen. He walked over to her and stood above her. "I am not leaving you. I told them you were my wife. I do not lie about things like that." He reached down with his good arm and grabbed her, hauling her to her feet. She was dead weight. He held her up, and she sobbed against his chest, her hands too sore to even grip his coat. I am a curse," she choked out. "They were right. Everything I touch, it dies." "Then we will die together," he said, his voice rough. "But not here." He held her for a long moment, the two of them standing in the driving rain. He looked around, his eyes scanning the ridge. Desperate, and he saw it. Through the mist, half hidden by a stand of pine, was a shape, a dark square. "There," he said, hope, or maybe just sheer will, hardening his voice. He pushed her toward his horse. "Get on!" It was a cabin, an old, broken-down miner's shack. Leaning so far to one side it looked like the next gust of wind would finish it, but the roof was mostly intact. Eli kicked the rotted door, and it fell off its leather hinges. Inside, it was dark and smelled of rat droppings and damp earth, but it was dry. He helped her inside, then went back for the animals, tying them in the small, ruined lean-to that had been a stable. He brought the packs inside. Clara sank to the floor, her back against the rough log wall. Eli found a few dry sticks in a corner and, with his good hand, struck a flint. He got a small, sputtering fire going in the stone hearth. The small, meager flame was the most beautiful thing Clara had ever seen. She watched him. He was at the end of his strength. The fever was raging. But he worked. He unpacked the blankets. He put a small pot of water on to boil. Clara sat, useless, and watched her meager possessions. Her carpet bag. The one thing she had saved. She had grabbed it as they were banished. It held her last ties to her old life. She opened it. Inside were a few clothes, her mother's locket, and a small, leather-bound book, the Reverend Blackwood's Book of Sermons. She pulled it out. She also had a small bundle of letters, tied with a ribbon. Letters he had written to her, long ago, when he had seemed like a kind, safe man. She looked at the fire. She looked at Eli, who was now slumped against the far wall, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. She took the first letter. She held it to the flame. It caught, curling, the black ink of his lies turning to ash. She dropped it and took another, one by one. She fed the fire. She fed it the sermons. She fed it the letters. She fed it the memory of Sarah Blackwood, the cursed preacher's wife. When the last one was gone, she felt empty. Not sad, not relieved, just empty, wiped clean. Eli's eyes were open. He was watching her. "I am cold," she whispered. It was the only truth left. He held out his good arm. She crawled across the dirt floor, her joints protesting, and settled beside him. He wrapped the blanket around both of them. He was burning hot, his skin dry with fever. She was cold as ice. They sat there, listening to the fire crackle. He hurt you too," Eli whispered, his voice thick. "Yes," she said. "He does not get to hurt you anymore." She turned, her face in the hollow of his shoulder. She could feel his heart beating, a slow, strained rhythm. "Thank you for what you said," she murmured, "about being your wife." I did not lie, he said. He pulled back, just enough to look at her. His gray eyes were dark with fever. In my heart, I did not lie. She looked at him. This broken, scarred, dangerous man. He was hers, and she was his. It was the only law that mattered. This was not the desperate, animal kiss in the storm. This was something else. She leaned in and kissed his lips, gently. They were dry, cracked. He made a sound, a low groan, and his good arm came up, his hand tangling in her damp hair. He kissed her back. It was clumsy, it was slow, it was real. They were two broken, damaged people, and they did not know how to be gentle, but they tried. His touch was hesitant, his one good hand learning the shape of her face, her shoulder, her waist. Her hands, blistered and raw, were clumsy as she touched his scarred jaw, his chest. It was an affirmation. It was not about pleasure. It was about life. It was about finding a single, safe, warm place in a world that was cold and sharp. They made love on the dirty floor of a broken-down cabin, huddled under a thin blanket, and for the first time in her life, Clara felt safe. She felt seen. She fell asleep in his arms, her head on his chest. She woke to the smell of wood smoke and the feel of his body against hers. He was holding her, and he was shaking. She looked up. Eli was awake. His head was turned away from her, but she could see the line of his jaw, the tension in his neck, and she could feel, on her shoulder, the wet heat of a tear. Another. He was holding her, and he was weeping. It was a silent, terrible grief. The man who had faced a cougar, who had killed 3 men, who had never flinched, was crying in the dark. He was crying for the girl in Texas, for the man he had been, for the pain in his arm, and for the sheer, agonizing relief of finally, holding something clean. Clara did not speak. She did not move. She just wrapped her own arms around him, her raw hands gripping his shirt, and held him back. The next morning, the fever had broken. Eli was weak, but his eyes were clear. The rain had stopped. A thin, watery sunlight streamed through the cracks in the cabin walls. For the first time, there was a feeling of peace. Clara was outside, checking the animals, when Eli's voice, sharp and urgent, came from the cabin. "Clara, inside, now!" She ran in. He was at the small, broken window, peering out. "What is it?" "Riders," he said, his voice flat. He was already checking the load in his rifle. She ran to the window. In the distance, coming up the trail they had made, were 5 men on horseback. They were riding slow, tracking. One of them, at the front, was a big man. He reined in, looking at the cabin. He unrolled a piece of paper. Even from this distance, Clara could see the bold, black letters. Wanted. "It is them," Eli whispered. He was not afraid. He was just tired. The one in the front. "That is Ben, my cousin." The man looked up at the cabin. He grinned, a terrible expression that carried across the distance. He said something to the others. "Eli!" The voice was a raw shout. "Eli Thatcher, we know you are in there. You snake! We've come to collect what is owed. We've come to collect you." "Eli, we got no quarrel. Ben, let us go!" Eli's voice was a desperate, hoarse shout. He was shoving Clara toward the back of the cabin, his good hand pushing the small of her back. His rifle was in his wounded hand. A shot rang out, and a bullet tore through the rotten log wall, whining past Clara's ear. She screamed. "The quarrel's blood! Eli!" Ben's voice roared from the tree line. "You killed my brother, you snake! There is no letting go. We are here to see you hang." Another shot, and the small window exploded, sending glass and rotted wood into the cabin. "The wall!" Eli grunted, shoving her against the back of the cabin. "It is rotted. Push!" There was no back door. The cabin was a trap, and they were in it. Clara threw her small weight against the logs. They were damp, soft. Eli slammed his shoulder into the wall, his face a mask of pain as the jolt tore at his wounded arm. "Again!" he yelled. More shots. The cabin was filling with a sharp smell of gunpowder. They pushed together, a desperate, lunging heave. A section of the log wall, eaten through by termites and damp, gave way with a groan of splitting wood. They were through. They tumbled out into a thicket of pine and bramble. "Run!" Eli grabbed her hand. Clara had been inside the cabin, by the fire. Her feet were bare. The moment she hit the forest floor, a sharp, unbelievable pain shot up her legs. The ground was not soft earth. It was a bed of shale, sharp rocks, and decades of dried pine needles. She cried out, stumbling, "Eli, I cannot, my feet!" "They are on horses. We have to move!" He did not slow down. He hauled her forward. "I cannot run," she sobbed, falling to her knees as a piece of shale sliced the sole of her foot. Behind them, she heard Ben's triumphant yell, "They are out the back! They are on foot! Get them!" Eli swore, a harsh, guttural sound. He turned back. He was weak, feverish, and his arm was bleeding again, a dark, hot soak through his sleeve. But he did not hesitate. He scooped her up, his good arm under her knees, his wounded arm clamping her back against his chest. Clara gasped. She was light, but he was so weak. He grunted with the effort, his face gray. "Hold on," he ground out. He ran. He crashed through the undergrowth, low-hanging pine branches whipping at their faces. Clara clung to him, her face buried in his shoulder, her bare feet bleeding against his shirt. She could feel the desperate, hammering beat of his heart. She could hear his ragged, painful breathing. Behind them, the posse was crashing through the woods. They were clumsy on horseback, but they were faster. "Where did they go?" a man shouted. "This way! Blood! The woman is bleeding!" Clara looked down. She was leaving a trail, drops of blood from her cut feet staining the pine needles. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Eli, put me down. I am marking the trail. Put me down. You can hide." "Quiet," he commanded. He shifted her weight, his face slick with sweat. He was looking, not running blindly, but hunting for an escape. The land was steep, falling away into a rocky ravine. He saw it, a dark fissure in the rock face, half hidden by a curtain of wild raspberry bushes. "He is heading for the rocks," Ben yelled. "He is trapped!" Eli lunged the last few feet. He pushed through the thorny branches, which tore at his skin, and half fell, half tumbled into the opening. It was a cave, not deep, but dark, a narrow split in the stone. He slid down the small incline, landing hard on the damp earth floor, Clara still in his arms. He crawled, dragging her with him, deeper into the darkness. It was tight. It smelled of fox and wet stone and fear. He put his hand over her mouth, his body shielding hers. "Be still," he breathed, his voice a raw whisper in her ear. They heard the horses outside. The men were dismounting. Where did he go? "In here somewhere. This whole ridge is full of holes. He is in here." Ben's voice was right outside the raspberry bushes. Clara's heart was a bird, beating itself to death against her ribs. "He is wounded," Ben said, his voice cold and satisfied. "And she is barefoot. They will not get far. Spread out. We will find them. If you see him, shoot. I want the body. The reward is good, dead or alive." They heard the men moving away, their boots scraping on the shale, their voices fading as they spread out to search the ridge. They were alone, in the dark, cramped space. It was the tent all over again, but the world outside was not just whispering. It was hunting. Clara was shaking so hard she could not speak. Eli let out his breath, a long, shuddering sigh. He leaned his head back against the cold stone. Clara looked down. Her feet, they were a ruin. She had not realized how badly she was cut,
They were covered in blood and dirt.
Eli,
She whispered, her voice trembling.
your arm.
He had set her down. He was slumped against the cave wall. The run, the strain of carrying her, had been too much. The rude bandage she had made from her petticoat was gone, torn away in the forest. His arm was bleeding, a steady, dark drip onto the cave floor. "It will stop," he said. He did not have the strength to sound convincing. She looked at him, this man who had carried her, who had saved her, who was wanted for murder by his own family. "Your cousin, Ben," she said, her voice small. He said you killed his brother.
Luke.
Eli did not open his eyes. He just sat there in the dark, bleeding.
I did.
"You told me. In the tent. You shot him," she whispered.
You said he was drowning a girl.
The silence in the cave was thick as mud. Eli was quiet for so long. She thought he had fallen unconscious. Finally, he spoke, his voice so low it was just a vibration in the dark. "I did not tell you all of it," he said. I guess I wanted you to think I was better than I am." He took a ragged breath.
His name was Luke Thatcher.
My blood, my kin. He was rotten, mean when he was sober, but pure poison when he was drunk. He liked hurting things, small things, animals, women. Clara watched his profile in the thin gray light from the cave entrance.
I was in the saloon. I heard a scream. From the alley out back. I knew that sound. It was Rosie, a girl. She was not more than 16, small.
His good hand clenched into a fist, his knuckles white.
I ran back. He was not just drowning her. That was a lie I told you, to make it cleaner.
He choked on the word.
He had her on the ground. He was using a broken bottle. Her face. God, Clara.
Clara put her hand on his arm, her fingers pressing into his skin.
I yelled at him,
Eli continued, his voice a dead monotone. He just laughed. He was covered in... He told me to get my own, and he turned back to her. He raised the bottle again. He was going to kill her. He was enjoying it, the sounds she was making. He stopped. The silence stretched. "So I shot him," he whispered.
I shot him in the back. He fell on her. I pulled him off. I tried to help her. Clara, I tore my shirt, but it was too late. She was too far gone. She bled out, right there in the filth of the alley.
He opened his eyes. They were bleak. Ben, he came running. He did not see what Luke was doing. He just saw me, standing over his brother's body, the dead girl. She was just saloon trash to him. He did not care. He just saw his blood, dead in the dirt. "A blood feud," Clara breathed. "Blood for blood," Eli confirmed, his voice bitter. "That is the only law they know. They did not care why. They just cared that they put a price on my head. I have been running from my own family ever since." Clara looked at him. The truth was harder, uglier, and more righteous than she could have imagined. He had not just stopped a man. He had executed a monster. He had done it to save a life, even if he had failed. She thought of Silas. She thought of the man she had shot at the shack. They were the same, both of them, killers of monsters. She looked at his hands, the big scarred hands that were so stained, the hand that had held the knife against the cougar, the hand that had held her, the hand that was now clamped tight, trying to stop the bleeding from his arm. She moved, crawling across the small space. She took his good hand. It was rough, covered in grime and dried blood. She lifted it to her lips. She kissed his knuckles, one by one. He flinched, as if she had burned him. She took his other hand, the one on his wounded arm, and pressed her lips gently to the back of it, tasting his blood. "You are a good man, Eli Thatcher," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "You are the best man I have ever known." A sound tore out of his chest, a low, agonized groan that was half a sob. He turned his face away from her, into the cold stone of the wall. They stayed hidden all day. The hunters did not find them. Night fell, and the cave grew cold. Eli was shivering, the blood loss and the fever taking hold again. Clara huddled against him, sharing her warmth. They listened. The men were still out there. They could hear them, far up on the ridge, calling to each other. Then a new smell. It was not the clean scent of pine. It was smoke, not a campfire. It was the acrid, choking smell of a forest on fire. Eli pushed himself up, his head snapping toward the entrance. "No," he whispered. "What is it?" Clara asked, her throat tightening. "They are trying to flush us out, or just kill us. They are burning the ridge." Clara scrambled to the entrance. The sky, which should have been black and full underscore of stars, was glowing a sick, pulsing orange. Smoke was rolling down the hillside like a thick gray fog. She panicked. The smell of burning pine, the choking air. It was hell. It was judgment. It was Kansas. "We are trapped," she gasped, backing into the cave. "Eli, we are going to burn. We are going to die in here. I cannot breathe." "Clara, be still." His voice was sharp. It cut through her terror. He was weak, but the hunted animal in him was awake. He put his good hand over her mouth, not gently. "Quiet. Listen." He was smelling the air. He was listening to the roar. "The wind," he whispered, his voice urgent. "It is blowing east, up the ridge, the fire. It is moving away from the base." He crawled to the mouth of the cave, dragging his wounded arm. He peered out, his eyes squinting against the smoke. "There is a way, if we are fast." "A way through that?" "The stream bed," he said. "The one we saw when we climbed. It is all shale and rock. It will not burn. If we can get to the bottom of it, we can get below the fire line. It will be our way out." He grabbed her hand. "We have to go. Now, Clara, run. Do not think about your feet. Just run." He pulled her out of the cave. The heat was like a physical blow. The air was so thick with smoke. It was like breathing wool. Embers, like angry red insects, were floating through the air. Clara did not feel the stones. She did not feel anything. She just ran, her hand locked in his. They scrambled, slipping and sliding down the steep embankment. They heard shouts. High up on the ridge, silhouetted against the wall of fire, they saw two riders. "There! Down there!" A shot rang out, but it was wild, lost in the roar of the fire. Eli shoved Clara. "Down! Slide!" They fell the last 20 feet, tumbling in an avalanche of loose shale, landing hard at the bottom of the dry stream bed. It was a deep, winding gash in the earth. The smoke was thick, settling in the gully, but the fire was above them, a terrifying, roaring canopy of orange. They ran. It was not running, it was a nightmare. They stumbled over boulders, waded through stagnant pools of mud, and climbed over fallen, half-charred trees. Clara's bare feet were numb, torn, and bleeding, but she did not stop. Eli was a ghost beside her, his breathing a wet, ragged sound. He was running on pure will. They heard shouts again. The posse! They were on the rim above, pacing them. "Down!" Eli hissed, pulling her behind a massive boulder. Two riders appeared on the edge of the gully, looking down. They were black shapes against the fire. "I do not see them," one yelled. "They are dead," Ben's voice called back. "Nothing could live in that smoke. Let them burn. It is done. Luke is avenged." Clara and Eli watched, not breathing. The riders turned their horses and disappeared. They ran for hours. The stream bed became a shallow, muddy creek. They splashed through the cold water, which soothed Clara's feet but chilled them to the bone. The smoke thinned. The roar of the fire faded behind them, just as the first sick gray light of dawn began to stain the sky. They found a small, overgrown path leading out of the creek. It was an old miner's trail. They climbed the bank. They were soaked, covered in soot, and shaking. We made it!" Clara gasped, her knees buckling. Eli stood beside her. He looked at her. Her face was black, her hair matted, her dress in ribbons. Her feet were a bloody ruin. He nodded. "Just once. We made it." He took one step onto the trail, and then his body, which had held on for so long, finally gave up. The will was gone. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed. He fell into the mud, face down, and did not move. "Eli!" Clara screamed. She crawled to him, shaking him. "Eli, no! Do not you dare!" He was unconscious. His breathing was shallow, a faint rasp. His arm was a disaster. The water had washed it clean, but the wound was open, raw, and bleeding again. She panicked. He was dying. Then the cold calm, the one that had saved her, washed over her again. I will not let him die. They were exposed, on the trail. The posse. What if they came back? What if they saw the tracks? She looked around, her eyes frantic. The trail was soft earth, pine needles. But there, just off the path, was a massive, overturned tree stump, its roots creating a dark, hollowed-out space beneath it. She had to hide them. She looked at her hands. They were raw. The blisters from the wagon ropes had torn, and they were cut from the forest. She did not care. She began to dig. She clawed at the soft, damp earth under the stump, ripping her nails, her hands screaming in protest. She dug like a trapped animal, scooping out handfuls of mud and roots, making a shallow hollow. It was not a grave. It was a nest. It took what felt like hours. It was not deep, but it was cover. She went back to Eli. He was a dead weight. She grabbed him under the arms. "Come on," she grunted, her teeth gritted. "You will not die. I will not allow it." She dragged him, inch by agonizing inch, across the 10 feet of ground. She pulled him into the shallow scrape she had made. It was a tight fit. She lay down beside him, her body pressed against his, and began to pull pine boughs, handfuls of wet leaves and loose dirt over them. She covered them completely, until they were just part of the forest floor. She lay there, her heart pounding in the cold, wet, dark. She listened. An hour passed, 2. Then she heard it. Horses. Her heart stopped. She pressed her hand over Eli's mouth, though he was not making a sound. The hoofbeats came closer. They stopped, right on the trail, 10 feet from where they were hidden. "The tracks end here," a man said, "right out of the creek." "I do not see anything," Ben's voice said. He sounded tired and angry. "They are dead," the first man said. "They must have crawled out and died. The animals will find them. It is over. Ben." A long silence. Clara could hear the jingle of a horse's harness. "Fine," Ben said, his voice flat. "It is done. Let the buzzards have them. I am riding out." She heard the horses turn. She heard them ride away, the sound of the hoofbeats growing fainter, until there was only silence. Clara lay in the dark, buried in the earth, and wept. She waited. She did not know how long. An hour, maybe more. Finally, carefully, she pushed the debris off them. Eli was still breathing, but he was cold. His skin was like ice. She had to save him. Her medical tin was gone, lost with the mule at the cabin. She had nothing. She pulled him deeper into the hollow. She stripped off the wet, ruined remnants of her dress. Leaving her in her thin chemise, she covered him with the cloth, trying to dry him. She lay against him, her skin to his, trying to force her own small warmth into his body. The fever came back. It raged for 2 days. He was in and out of consciousness. He thrashed, crying out names she did not know. "Luke, Rosie, Ben, run!" Clara did not sleep. She found water in the creek. She found moss, a thick, clean carpet of it, and packed his wound, binding it with strips torn from her chemise. She remembered seeing Eli look at Yarrow, and she found the feathery plant, crushing its leaves and packing it with the moss. She hunted. She found berries, the ones the birds were eating. She found wild onions. On the third day, Eli's eyes opened, and they were clear. The fever was gone. He looked at her. She was a wild thing, half naked, covered in mud, her hair a matted tangle, her hands and feet bloody. "Clara," he rasped. His voice was a bare whisper. "I am here," she said, her own voice raw. She smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in... She could not remember. He looked at her hands, caked in dried blood and dirt, the nails broken to the quick. He looked at her bare, torn feet. "Your feet," he whispered. "They will heal," she said. "So will you." They were quiet. They were alive. The world was just this small hollow under a tree root. She needed to tell him, just as he had told her. She needed the last of the poison to be gone. "Eli," she said, her voice soft. When I told you about my husband in the tent, I did not tell you all of it." He just looked at her, his gray eyes weak, but holding hers. He did not just have the poker," she whispered. He was drunk. He came at me. He said he was going to cleanse my wicked soul. He said if I would not give him a child, he would send me to God himself." Her voice broke. "He was strangling me. Eli, I could not breathe. His face, it was not him, it was a monster." She took a shuddering breath. I had the candlestick, the heavy brass one, the one that traveler, Abernathy, mentioned. The final, terrible truth. "I did not just push him," she whispered, her eyes locked on his. "He was on top of me. I hit him. I hit him with it, as hard as I could. I wanted to live." "He fell," she said, the tears coming now, hot and silent. "He hit his head on the inn table, just like I said, but it was not just a fall, it was a blow. I killed him. I did not just survive. I killed him." She waited for the judgment, for the look of revulsion. Eli's good hand, weak and trembling, came up. He touched her cheek. "He tried to kill you," he rasped. "Yes, and you survived." "Yes." "That is not a sin, Clara," he whispered. "That is not a sin." She looked at him. He understood. He, the man who had killed Luke. She, the woman who had killed the Reverend. They were not murderers. They were not sinners. They were just survivors. The shame of Kansas, the heavy, dark shroud of Sarah Blackwood. It just dissolved. It was gone. She was just Clara. She leaned her head down on his chest, listening to the slow, weak but steady beat of his heart. They stayed in the hollow for a week. Eli's strength slowly returned. Clara's feet began to heal. She foraged, finding berries and roots. She made a snare, just as Eli had shown her on the trail once, and caught a rabbit. They cooked it over a tiny, smokeless fire. They were alive. One evening, they were sitting at the mouth of their hollow, watching the sun set. The sky was a clear, bruised purple. The air was clean. "If we make it out of this," she said, her voice quiet. "If we find a place, a real place." He looked at her. I will wear white again," she said, a small, sad smile on her face. "I want to. I was married in black. My husband said it was fitting, humble. It was my mourning dress for my father." She reached out, her torn, healing hand touching his scarred cheek. "But for you," she whispered. "If we make it, I want to wear white, just for you." Eli looked at her.
His gray eyes, no longer feverish, were wet. He was not the man who had to weep in the dark anymore. He let her see it. He pulled her close with his good arm, his hand burying in her tangled hair. He held her tight, his face pressed against her. "Clara," he whispered, his voice thick, You do not need a white dress." He pulled back, his hand cupping her jaw, his thumb brushing away a tear she did not know had fallen. You are white. You are the only clean thing I have ever had." She closed her eyes, leaning into his hand, and held him. They were not running. They were not hiding. They were just healing. They walked out of the wilderness 2 weeks later, more like ghosts than people. Eli's wound had closed, but his strength was slow to return. Clara's feet were a mass of new, tender pink scars, and she walked with a permanent, careful limp. They had his roan horse and her mule, and the clothes on their backs, stiff with dried mud and smoke. They had survived the fire, the hunt, and the hollow, and in doing so, had burned away the last of the people they used to be. Sarah Blackwood was gone. The hunted drifter was gone. There was only Eli, and there was only Clara. They headed north, keeping the jagged teeth of the mountains to their west. They traveled for another week, avoiding the main trails, until they stumbled into a place called Gold Creek. It was not a town. It was a raw, muddy gash in the earth. 1,000 men, half mad with gold fever, had ripped the valley apart. It was a chaotic sprawl of tents, lean-tos, and raw timber shacks. Sluice boxes choked the creek, and the air was filled with the sound of picks, shovels, and the constant, dull roar of a hydraulic monitor blasting the hillside apart. There was no law here. There was only gold. It was the perfect place to disappear. Clara, her face streaked with dirt, her hair in a matted braid, walked into the largest, loudest saloon, a canvas tent called the Pickled Miner. She found the owner, a man with a heavy gold watch chain and no neck. "I need work," she said. Her voice was not a plea. It was a fact. The man looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her ragged dress. "We got girls for that." "I am not a girl for that," Clara said, her voice cold as creek water. "I am a cook. Your men are eating swill. I can smell it from here. They are going to get sick. You pay me, and I will cook food that keeps them digging." The man was surprised by her nerve. He looked at her hard, calloused hands. He looked at her eyes, which were clear and steady, and held no fear of him. $10 a week. He grunted. 20, Clara said, "and a shack for me and my husband." The man laughed. "Husband? Where is he?" Clara nodded toward the tent flap. Eli was standing there. He was gaunt, his clothes in ribbons, his scarred face grim. He looked, she thought, like the angel of death on a holiday. The saloon owner's laugh died in his throat. He can chop wood for the cook tent," Clara said. "We start now." They were given a small, windowless shack of green lumber at the edge of the camp. It smelled of pine sap and mud, but it had a stove and 2 cots. It was a home. Their life fell into a hard, simple rhythm. Clara rose before dawn, baking biscuits, boiling vats of coffee, frying salt pork and beans. The miners, used to their own burnt, gritty cooking, ate her food with a kind of religious silence. Eli, his bad arm still stiff, took an axe and went to the wood pile. He chopped wood all day. His silence and his size kept the other men at a distance. He worked, and he watched. His eyes were always on the mess tent. He was always watching Clara. They did not talk much. They did not need to. At night, in the small shack, she would clean the wound on his side, the one that was now healing. He would sit, his back to her, and she would trace the new scar, adding it to the map of his past. He would watch her knead dough for the next day, his gray eyes soft in the lamplight. They were 2 broken halves, And here, in this raw, lawless place, they had found a way to be whole. The peace lasted for 2 months. The Montana winter was setting in. The ground was hard as iron, and the gold was harder to find. Men grew desperate. New, rougher men drifted into camp. One day, a man rode in. He was not a miner. He wore 2 pistols, tied low, and his eyes were not frantic with gold fever. They were cold, patient. He walked into the mess tent for a meal. Clara served him his stew. He looked at her, then looked over at Eli, who was splitting logs in the cold afternoon light. The man ate, paid, and left. Clara's stomach tightened. It was a feeling she now knew well. It was the feeling of being seen. That evening, she saw him. He was standing outside the Pickled Miner, talking to the owner. He unrolled a piece of paper and tacked it to the board outside. Clara felt her blood turn to ice. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over. The men in line for the saloon stepped aside for her. They called her ma'am. She looked at the paper. The sketch was old, the lines blurred by rain and sun. But it was him, wanted. The black letters screamed, Eli Thatcher, $500, for the murder of Luke Thatcher, dead or alive. She did not gasp. She did not cry. Her hand, steady and hard, reached up. She tore the paper from the board, crumpled it into a ball, and shoved it into her apron pocket. The bounty hunter, she knew what he was, watched her. He was standing across the muddy street. He smiled, a thin, cruel expression. He touched the brim of his hat, then turned and walked into the saloon. He knew, and she knew he knew. She finished her work. She scrubbed the stew pot until her knuckles were raw. She walked back to their shack. Eli was inside, mending a strap on his saddle. He looked up when she entered, and he saw her face. "What is it?" he asked. She pulled the crumpled paper from her pocket and smoothed it on the small table. He stared at it. The resignation, the familiar, tired ghost, settled back over him. He closed his eyes. "So," he said, his voice flat, "it is over." He stood up, the old, hunted look returning. I will not run again. I will not take you back to that hollow. I will not have you digging in the mud." "What are you saying?" she asked, though she already knew. "I am turning myself in," he said. He picked up his hat. "That man, he is a bounty hunter. I will go to him. I will make a deal. He takes me in, but he leaves you be. He gets his money. I get what I have earned." "What you have earned?" Clara's voice was a low, fierce hiss. She stepped in front of the door, blocking his way. "What have you earned? Eli, a rope? For what?" "For Luke," he said, his voice dead. "For the blood." "No," she said. She put her hands on his chest, her small, hard hands pressing against his shirt. "You listen to me. You saved a girl. Her name was Rosie. You saved me. From Silas, from myself. We will not let you hang for that. That is not a crime. That is not justice." He looked down at her, his face a mask of grief. "Clara, there is no other way. He will not stop. They will never stop." "Yes, there is," she said. Her mind was sharp. The fire had not just scarred her. It had forged her. "You told me, in the cave, Rosie. She had a sister, in Helena, at the Silver Rose Saloon. She saw what Luke was like. She was just scared." Eli was confused. Yes, her name was Sadie, but what does that matter?" "It matters," Clara said, her eyes bright. "Helena is the territorial capital. It is not some camp. It has law. It has a judge. A real one." She began to pace the tiny shack. "I can write. Eli, my husband, the Reverend, he taught me. I was his scribe. I know words. I know how to sound. Educated." She grabbed a piece of paper, a stub of a pencil she used for her supply lists. I will write a letter. Not as Clara, not as Sarah, as a school teacher, a concerned citizen. Mrs. Wendell. I will tell this judge. I will tell him everything. I will tell him a witness to the murder of Rosie and Luke Thatcher has come forward. And her name is Sadie, and she works at the Silver Rose. I will beg him, for the sake of justice, to find her, to ask her the truth. Eli stared at her. Clara, that is a fool's chance. A letter? It is not a fool's chance, she said. It is our chance. We will send it with the freighter who leaves tomorrow. And we will wait. Wait, Eli growled. That bounty hunter, Sipes, he will not wait. Then you will make him, Clara said, her eyes locked on his. You will not run. You will not hide. You will stand your ground. You will chop your wood, and you will wait. I am not losing you. Eli, not to them, not to you. He looked at her for a long time. The hunted look in his eyes slowly faded, replaced by a reluctant, fragile hope. He nodded. The letter went out the next morning, and the waiting began. It was a week of unbearable tension. The bounty hunter, Sipes, did not leave. He sat in the mess tent, drinking coffee, his eyes on Eli. He sat in the saloon, his eyes on the door of their shack. He was a spider, waiting. Eli did not run. He chopped wood. Every swing of his axe was a defiance. He was slow, deliberate, and he never turned his back on the mess tent. Clara cooked. She served Sipes his food, her hands steady, her expression blank. The entire camp could feel the weight between the three of them. On the 8th day, Sipes got tired of waiting. Clara was behind the mess tent, dumping the day's potato peels. The late afternoon light was gray and thin. Your man is a fool, lady. Sipes stepped out from behind the woodpile. He had her cornered against the back wall of the tent. He thinks I will just leave? Sipes laughed, a low, ugly sound. My patience is gone. You are going to go to that shack. You are going to tell him to come out, hands high. If you do not, I will take you. He stepped closer. Accessory to a fugitive. That is a good long time in a cell, Mrs. Thatcher, or whatever your name is. He grabbed her arm. His fingers, like iron bands, bit into her skin. You are coming with me. Let her go. Eli was there. He had not come from the shack. He had come from the woodpile, his axe still in his hand. He was not shouting. His voice was a low, cold rumble. Sipes spun, his hand dropping to his pistol. He was fast, but Eli was not aiming for a gunfight. Eli threw the axe. It did not spin. He threw it underhand, a flat, hard throw. The heavy, blunt back of the axe head slammed into Sipes' gun hand with a sickening crack. Sipes screamed, his pistol falling into the mud. His wrist was broken. Eli was on him. He did not hit him. He did not draw his knife. He just hit him. A force of nature, his one good arm, his shoulder, his entire weight, slammed into the bounty hunter, driving him back into the wall of the mess tent. Sipes was a fighter. He was tough, but Eli was fighting for his life. He was fighting for Clara. He was fighting for their home. The bounty hunter, his hand useless, pulled a knife from his boot with his left hand. He lunged, a desperate, clumsy stab. Clara screamed. The blade sank into Eli's side, high on the ribs, the same side that had been stabbed before. Eli roared. It was not a sound of pain. It was a sound of pure, primal rage. He grabbed Sipes' left hand, the one with the knife, and twisted. The sound of bone snapping echoed in the cold air. Sipes collapsed, sobbing, holding his two broken hands to his chest. Eli stood over him, breathing like a winded bull. His hand went to his side. It was already dark with blood. The entire camp was watching. Miners frozen in the street, their mouths open. Eli looked down at the whimpering man. He could kill him. He could end it. He looked at the knife in the mud. He looked at Clara, her face white with terror. "I am done," Eli breathed, his voice ragged. He was done killing. He nudged Sipes with his boot. Get on your horse, and if you ever come back, I will not stop. Do you hear me? I will not stop." Sipes, crying in pain, scrambled in the mud, got to his feet and stumbled, half ran, toward his horse. He fumbled with the reins, his hands useless, and finally dragged himself into the saddle. He kicked the horse and fled the camp, a broken, defeated man. Eli leaned against the wall of the tent. Clara was at his side in an instant, her hands pressing against the new wound. "You fool," she whispered, her voice choked with tears and relief. You let him go." "I am not him," Eli gasped, leaning his weight on her. "I am not my kin." The freighter returned 2 days later. Eli was in their shack, propped up on the cot, his side bound tight. The wound was clean, but he was weak. Clara saw the freighter and ran. He had a letter. It was official, embossed with the seal of the Montana Territory. It was addressed to Mrs. C. Wendell. She tore it open, her hands shaking so badly she could barely read. It was from the judge. His name was William Hayes. He had received her letter. He had known Rosie. He had been fond of her. He had always suspected the Thatcher family of covering up the truth. Her letter, he wrote, had given him the cause he needed. He had found Sadie, Rosie's sister. Sadie, no longer afraid of the Thatcher feud, had testified. She had told the court everything, about Luke's brutal nature, about the beatings, about the night Rosie died. The warrant for Eli Thatcher was void. The case was closed. The official judgment, he wrote, was justifiable homicide. Clara read the last lines through a blur of tears. "Mr. Thatcher is a free man. Mrs. Wendell, wherever you are, tell him he has no more cause to run. His name is clear." She ran back to the shack, the letter clutched in her hand. Eli was asleep. "Eli," she whispered, shaking him. "Eli, wake up." He opened his eyes, his gaze clouded with pain. She knelt beside his cot. "We are free," she wept, pressing the letter into his hand. "Eli, we are free." He read it twice. He did not speak. He just looked at her. He reached out with his good hand, the calloused, scarred hand she had kissed in the cave, and he touched her face. They did not stay in Gold Creek. They had no reason to. They sold what little they had. They bought food, a pack mule, and an axe. They left the raw, muddy camp and rode, not west, but south. They rode back. They rode for 2 weeks, back to the ridge, back to the place where they had hidden from the storm. The rock lean-to was still there. The land was quiet, empty. It was hard and cruel and beautiful. It was theirs. They stood on the ridge, the wind whipping her hair. The world was vast, a sea of gray sage and distant blue mountains. Eli turned to her. He was still thin, and the new scar on his side pulled at his shirt. He had nothing. "Clara," he said, his voice rough in the wind. He knelt, slowly, his bad legs stiff. He reached down, not for a ring, but for a piece of silver birch bark, peeling from a nearby tree. He twisted it, his scarred hands working gently into a small circle. I have no gold," he said, his voice thick. "I have nothing, just this." He looked up at her, his gray eyes full of a lifetime of pain and a new, fragile light. "I told them you were my wife, in my heart. It was the only truth I had. Will you make it the truth? Before God, will you be my wife, Clara?" She was crying, the cold wind drying the tears on her cheeks. She held out her hand, her small, scarred, work-hardened hand. I already am,
she whispered. He slid the band of bark onto her finger. They did not leave. They built their home there, on the ridge. They built it into the side of the hill, a dugout of stone and sod, with a thick roof that would hold against the wind. It was small. It was wind-worn. It was warm. Eli cut wood. Clara planted a garden, her hands in the hard, rocky soil, willing things to grow. The land was harsh, but it was their own. A year passed. The winter came again, deep and white. Snow fell, soft and silent, blanketing the world. Inside the small dugout, a fire snapped in the hearth. It was warm. Eli was sitting at the small, rough-hewn table he had built, mending a piece of harness. He heard her move. He looked up. Clara was standing by the fire. She had a new dress. She had made it herself, in secret, sewing it by hand from 2 bleached flour sacks. It was simple. It had no lace, no pearls, but it was white. She stood there, her hands clasped, watching him. He put the harness down. He just looked at her. He looked at the woman in the white dress, her face soft in the firelight. "You dragged me into your tent," he said. His voice was a low, rough murmur. "Back at Laramie, just pulled me in out of the dark. Now," he shook his head, a small, slow movement. "Now I cannot imagine leaving it." Clara smiled. It was a soft, sure smile. She walked to him. She took his hand, the one that had held the knife, the one that had held the axe, the one that wore no ring, and she pressed it to her waist. Her body was fuller, softer. "Good," she whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Because I want you here." She kissed his scarred jaw. "Bigger than I thought, and better too." Thank you for listening to this story from Wild West. We love sharing these tales with you, so please comment with where you are listening from, connect with others, subscribe, and share your thoughts.